Hi, I'm Betty McLean, and welcome to Healthcare Hope, a podcast for nurses. With 2 decades of bedside experience and now as a certified burnout coach, I understand the challenges nurses face. I believe that all stress is manageable and burnout is not inevitable. Join me in building strength for yourself and hope for the future of our industry. Today, we are diving into a crucial topic that's often talked about, but rarely done well. And that is the topic of boundaries. We're going to explore what boundaries are, why they're essential for your career as a nurse, and how you can start using them today. Let's start with the basics. What are boundaries? Boundaries are simply the limits and rules that we set for ourselves in relationships, whether that's personal or professional. They define what we're comfortable with and how we will allow others to treat us. That's what they are. In healthcare, it's easy to blur those lines. We're conditioned to put others' needs before our own. In fact, some nurses are explicitly taught that their physical and emotional needs don't matter. This is also taught implicitly in society, especially to girls and young women, though I think we are starting to move away from that somewhat. This conditioning leads to overextending ourselves, which leads to burnout and leads to resentment. Boundaries help protect our energy, our time, and our mental health by ensuring that we're not constantly giving and giving and giving at the expense of our own well-being. Think of boundaries as the invisible fence around your personal space. I literally imagine a white picket fence between a city sidewalk and a beautiful little lawn. In my imagination, there are bushes and butterflies and a lovely little stone walkway from the gate through the garden up to my quaint little house. If you've ever seen the 1946 movie, It's a Wonderful Life, I actually picture Mary's house from that movie. Anyway, a boundary is like that white picket fence, allowing you to keep the good in and keep the bad out. Without that picket fence, it's like leaving that garden gate wide open, letting anything and anyone in to invade your space and your peace. The wonderful thing about learning to develop healthy boundaries is that you'll be able to be around people who used to drain you and make you feel disrespected or annoyed. You'll be able to navigate situations that used to make you feel anxious or overwhelmed. Rather than being annoyed or overwhelmed, you'll learn to feel peaceful and empowered because you know exactly what you need to do to protect your peace. In healthcare, boundaries aren't just important, they're essential. As nurses, we often face emotional, physical, and mental demands that can and do drain us, even when we're being careful. Setting boundaries helps prevent burnout by ensuring that we're not constantly running on empty and creating resentment by saying yes when we should have said no. Let me give you an example. Have you ever found yourself staying late at work, even when you're exhausted, just because you felt guilty about leaving a task unfinished? You get that look from the oncoming nurse, and you say, "It's fine, I'll do that dressing change before I leave." Or you offer to do a bed bath even though you should have clocked out a long time ago. Or maybe you've taken on an extra shift, even when you know you need the day off. These are classic signs of nurses with poor boundaries. And I know I've been there. When we lack boundaries, we become overwhelmed. And over time, this leads to burnout. On the flip side, when we have clear boundaries, we protect our well being and our energy, and we can show up as the best version of ourselves for our patients, for our coworkers, for our families, but most importantly, for ourselves. One of the biggest misconceptions about boundaries is that they're selfish or that they create distance between you and other people. A healthy boundary will actually allow you to be closer to others rather than creating distance, because you'll be able to engage with other people in a way that feels good and safe to you. Good boundaries allow you to take care of yourself so that you can be fully present and effective in your role and in your relationships. The last thing I want to discuss on the importance of boundaries before we get into how to do it portion is this concept. Boundaries are for you to protect your energy. They are not to be used to try to control someone else's behavior. If you're setting a boundary with the hopes that the other person will change, that's called manipulation, not a boundary. So get that idea out of your head right now. You don't want to try to control other people because you don't want to be controlled. Boundaries are to protect you, not to control other people. Remember that white picket fence? People are allowed to walk on the city sidewalk, but you get to decide who comes in through that garden gate and up into the house. Now, we understand what they are and why they're important. Let's talk about how to actually set them. First of all, you're going to decide the boundary ahead of time. If you're trying to create a boundary in the moment of conflict, it's actually called reacting, which is fine, but it's not a boundary. So let's imagine a coworker asks you to stay late to do a dressing change. I've had this happen. The first time something like this happened to me, I was flustered and confused. I reacted and got through it. I now have a boundary. So the first step is setting boundaries to understand your limits. Reflect on what drains you or situations that make you uncomfortable. Also, reflect on what energizes you. Pay attention to moments when you feel stressed, overwhelmed, or resentful. Those are signs that a boundary's been crossed and you have some work to do ahead of time. Once you've identified your limits, it's time to communicate them. This can be challenging, especially in a work environment where we're often expected to say yes. But remember, it is okay to say no. For example, if you're asked to take on an extra shift and you already feel exhausted, it is perfectly okay to decline. You don't have to be rude. You can just decline. You might say something like, I'd love to help, but I need to take my day off so I can be at my best the next shift I'm scheduled. When you think about communicating a boundary, you might get anxious, which is normal. Humans are tribal creatures, and we don't like to think that we might be making someone upset. But this is rather self-centered thinking. Just like no one can tell you what to think, you do not control what other people think. What other people get upset about is not for you to decide. Also, you don't have to have a big drawn out conversation. Just say no and end the conversation. If the boundary is likely to come up often or the person is very important to you, you might choose to explain your boundary in more detail. But most people, like coworkers, they don't need a full explanation. Setting boundaries is one thing, but maintaining them is another. Consistency is the key here. If you've set a boundary around not checking work emails on your day off, stick to it. If you bend your boundary too often, others will not take them seriously, and you'll find yourself back at square one. We teach people around us how to treat us, and it all relates to our boundaries. If you've told your family that on your days off, you will not text or call before 9 a.m., then just don't respond if they're reaching out at 7 a.m. When you mess up, because you will, and you let someone cross a boundary, just notice it and double down next time. Remember, by having the boundary, you're making it so that you have the energy to show up for them on your terms. Lastly, I want to encourage you to keep your boundaries simple and uncomplicated. Use if then to ensure that you can easily take care of yourself. Here are some examples of healthy boundaries that I've created for myself or I've helped my clients create for themselves. Example, if staffing calls on my day off, then I will only pick up an extra shift if I am truly well rested. Next, if my coworker asks me to help them, then I will only help if I have the time and energy to do so. Lastly, if my coworker starts venting to me, then I will tell them, I can't talk about this right now. and walk away. Those are all examples of doing things to manage our own energy. That last one could be a hard one. We want to be there for our coworkers, but we have to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves first so that we can show up for others. When we are emotionally grounded and have good energy levels, then we get to decide to help in situations where it's appropriate. Here are a couple of non work related boundaries that I've set for myself or helped others set to give you some ideas of how you would use the simple if then to set boundaries. If my family starts talking about politics, then I will leave the room. Simple. They don't have to not talk about politics, but I'm going to protect my boundaries. If my family asks me, when am I going to have a baby? Then I will politely change the topic of conversation. If someone raises their voice towards me, then I will leave the room or space. If I'm feeling anxious at the party, then I will tell my significant other and we will leave. In all of these, you do not have to confront the person with, how dare you cross my boundary? You simply take care of yourself and let them keep walking on down the city sidewalk. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you that setting boundaries isn't a one time thing, it's a practice. It takes time and patience and a lot of self awareness. But the more that you do it, the more you'll see the positive impact it has on your mental and physical health. Remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup. By setting boundaries, you're ensuring that you have the energy and the focus and the resilience to continue doing the incredible work you do in the world without sacrificing your own well being. If setting boundaries at work and at home is a constant struggle for you, it might be time to get some additional help. You can contact me and we can do a free burnout discovery call where we'll talk about your struggles with burnout and with boundaries and how coaching might be able to help in your situation. Thank you for listening today. If you're ready for support and looking for a community of like-minded healthcare professionals, join me in my free private Facebook group called Healthcare Hope with Coach Betty. If you found this episode helpful or encouraging, please share it with your friends and fellow nurses. Subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Together, we can create strength for our lives and hope in healthcare.